Good morning. Good morning. Happy Wednesday. Happy Wellness Wednesday. I am excited because we have a beautiful cool front coming in. If you're just stumbling on my page, I live in Florida and it's been warm. But the last week we've had little cooler temperatures creeping in, and our high today is supposed to be 70, which I'm super excited about. Tomorrow's low will be 50. So it may not last long, but it is definitely the start of some more comfortable temperatures here. If you are here, let me know you're here, because Facebook doesn't always show me all the things. Sometimes I see eyeballs, sometimes I see names, and sometimes I do see, not all the time, but I often do see comments and questions. So don't hesitate to interact, drop a comment, a tip, something positive to add, or ask a question. In the meantime, I sincerely hope that everyone in my viewership, anyone that might see this, is safe and recovering from Helene and Milton, and that you've enjoyed my last two videos about waiting for the storm and also about recovery. If you haven't seen those and you would like to, let me know. I'll share a link to last week's in the comments here. And if you haven't seen the one about recovering after Helene, it talks about emotional recovery, and that's still super important right now, because everybody's in some form of, everybody, at least in an area that was impacted, is still recovering in some form or fashion. Maybe even some people that aren't, but watched and experienced some survival guilt. So, or survivor's guilt is what it's called. And I talk about that in the video about recovery. So if you're just stumbling on my page, again, my name is Donna. I am a mom, a nana, a girlfriend, a grad school student studying for my Master of Science in Clinical Mental Health Counseling. I also own an online activewear boutique. I am a part-time program director for my local NAMI affiliate, which is the National Alliance on Mental Illness. And I just love to dance, run, all the things. So I'm super wellness oriented. I'm super wellness advocate. And it's a big umbrella. There's a lot of things that we can cover under the umbrella of wellness. And if you've watched before, you may feel, good morning, Miss Ann, you may feel that some of the things I say are repetitive, but the truth of the matter is that we often have to hear some things over and over and over again before they really stick or before they really click and we're actually ready mentally and emotionally to hear them. So yes, there's a lot of repetition, but the fact is that also a lot of solutions to our wellness issues overlap. There's a lot of overlap in specific core things that you can do to improve your wellness experience overall as you go through your journey. And I've spent most of my life battling with depression and anxiety. I consider myself to be in recovery most of the time, but I struggle too. And that's why it's called recovery and not recovered, because every day is a new day and different stressors can lead to a lot of different things. So if it feels repetitive, or if it feels like you're hearing the same thing all the time, that might be something that's speaking to you that you need to look at in your own journey. So since the storms, there's been a lot of, especially since Milton, because we had kind of two back to back, there's been a lot of discussion on social media about something called hurricane fatigue, which is a real thing, but it's also not new and it's not limited to post-storm experiences. So that's what I want to dig into today, because while recovering from these storms, both physically, mentally, financially, all those things are super important, we also need to reach a point where we can move forward a little bit and not focus so much on those and start focusing on other things in our lives, especially this beautiful weather that we have coming behind it, which from what the weather bunnies say, the reliable weather bunnies can give us sort of a protective factor here from anything else that might be coming in the near future. So let's go ahead and dig in. So hurricane fatigue is also known as, and you may have heard this before, event fatigue, post-event blues, or post-goal depression. Essentially, it's a grief response. And it's a grief response because you've had this high stakes adrenaline to get you through the preparation, whatever that looked like, whether it was preparing for a storm, whether it was preparing for a big goal like running a marathon, preparing for a giant event at work. Those are all things that require a lot of extra emotion, extra thought, extra everything. Good morning, Miss Patricia. And so there's this high stakes adrenaline that gets us through that preparation. And then once the event is over, sometimes regardless of the outcome, we have a crash. So have you ever felt drained or down after achieving something big? Because this absolutely follows a hurricane experience, but this can also follow achieving a big goal. And that can look like a lot of different things, and we'll talk about that for a minute. But that can include hurricanes, marathons, half marathons, family crises. If you've just started running, it can include something as small as a 5K, which most people don't think is small, and right now neither do I. Work stress, like I said, big work events, where in my previous life as an executive director for a local home builders association, I planned 4 big events a year. And without fail, every single one of those events, I would be hyped up and running on adrenaline, doing everything I could to make sure it was perfect, make sure it was wonderful, the whole 9 yards. And then once it was over, regardless of the outcome, I felt drained. I just felt completely drained. And sometimes, especially if it was bigger than usual, meaning it had more turnout than usual or had some extra stuff, it would take me a few days to recover both mentally and emotionally. So that's what I mean when I say it's not just about hurricanes. Good morning, Danielle. This can be any kind of a big event. This can be work stress. This can be a family crisis. Marathon runners often report training for this marathon, which takes a lot out of you physically, mentally, and emotionally. And then once they've achieved that goal, even if they've PR'd, even if it's been a wonderful experience, they're just kind of dead afterwards. I know that my first half marathon, and I think almost every half marathon I've run, from my very first one to the one, which I did terrible at, to the one that I knocked 20 minutes off of my time, I felt kind of empty and aimless afterwards, and that is normal. So my question to you again, have you ever felt drained or down after achieving something big? Because that's what a lot of us are experiencing right now with, in the post-hurricane aftermath, but it is a normal thing that occurs in a lot of other ways. And like I said, it's essentially a grief response because your whole life has centered around this thing, whatever it is, for a period of anywhere from hours to days, maybe even weeks. So once you don't have that kind of running the show anymore, sometimes we feel lost and directionless and overwhelmed by what's next. So examples of this, just to get into a little more detail, hurricanes, we spend weeks days, sometimes weeks preparing. Maybe we even evacuate. We spend that time protecting. That's our whole focus, preparing, protecting, and possibly evacuating, finding someplace safe to go. So once it's done, again, regardless of the outcome, whether we made it out without any damage, like a lot of us in my area did this time, we moved the day before, we moved out of the cone. And so we experienced damage, but not to the extent that we could have from Milton. And we might expect to feel relieved when that's all over with, but sometimes we don't. Sometimes there's no emotion at all. Sometimes there's a little bit of relief, but it's followed by a massive amount of overwhelm by figuring out what's next. And sometimes that can be prolonged if you're not at home, if you've evacuated, if you're in someone else's home or somewhere that you're out of your routine, or if you have evacuees, and that's putting you out of your routine. All of those things can create a sense of overwhelm by what's next because you want to get back to normal, but there's so much preventing you from being able to do that depending on what your experience during the storm was. So, and again, for major achievements, we've talked about the marathoners crash after completing months of training toward a goal. And I'm getting these weird little reactions again on my screen. So I don't know if you guys can see those. If you can, let me know because I'm just curious. So months, weeks, whatever, of training toward a goal. You might feel lost without a goal to push you forward after that. Like I said, without a doubt, every time I've run a half marathon, the training has been there, but then afterwards, it sometimes takes me a month to 2 months before I can even get back to a weekly run because I just feel so unmotivated and kind of empty. Another great example of this is family events, weddings, especially if you're planning a wedding for your child or if you're the person planning the wedding for yourself. Weddings take up a lot of time and they take up a lot of thought and finances and resources and a lot of figuring out. And we talk about bridezillas, but a lot of times it's just because they are stressed to the max and maybe even a little over the top. So, getting a child ready for that big move to college, caring for a loved one. This is another big one, y'all. If you've been the caretaker for a loved one that then passes, these things are often followed by feelings of emptiness and purposelessness, where you don't really know what you're doing now once all that is over with. And again, we talked about work with big projects or handling major crises at work. These are often followed by emotional burnout, and a general lack of direction. I know one good example for me was during the pandemic. While I was able to stay working during the pandemic because we kept our office closed, and handled things kind of remotely, it was hard during the pandemic because things were different to stay motivated. And then afterwards, going back to normal was a really rough transition. Because again, that went on for months. So, trying to transition back into normalcy was extremely difficult and filled with a lot of burnout and directionlessness, and it was just difficult. So again, I can't stress enough, post-event fatigue, this hurricane fatigue we're talking about, these are things, these are things that happen in a lot of situations. And it's not something that is necessarily a thing that we're not going to have to deal with just because there's not a hurricane in the horizon. So let's talk about some signs and symptoms. They look really similar. All of the symptoms, regardless of what title you give this, kind of look similar to symptoms of depression, emotional numbness, overwhelm, increased irritability, sadness, feeling empty. Those are some of the emotional symptoms. Physical signs can be chronic tiredness. I'm still struggling to get a decent night's sleep. Trouble sleeping, like I just talked about. Headaches, feeling a need to physically recover. Mentally, difficulty focusing or making decisions. Now, we've talked about depression more times than I can count. We've also talked about anxiety. And again, that repetition, that overlap is what's happening here. These symptoms are all similar. And then lack of motivation, an elevated level of procrastination. I know I struggled. When I have family here, I love them. I feel like I want to interact with them, like I want to entertain them. But it makes it difficult for me to get back into some kind of a routine. And so I have a tendency to drag my feet on all the things I'm supposed to do. Good morning, Alicia. And then, of course, like I said, there's that general not knowing what to do next, especially if you're overwhelmed by the aftermath of whatever it is, or you've completed a goal and you're not sure what the next step is. Does it need follow-up? Is it time to move on to the next thing? There can be a lot of overwhelm involved there. And just like I said, directionlessness. So what do we do about it? What do we do about it? We can't often do anything about these life stressors, these major life stressors. We know we can't do anything about hurricanes. They're going to come. If you live in an area of potential impact, they're going to come. There's even places that we didn't think would have potential impact that had to deal with a crazy, devastating aftermath. Big work events come up. Big work crises come up. You complete big goals and then sometimes you're lost about what to do afterwards. So what do we do to help mitigate this a little bit? Well, first of all, we have to recognize and acknowledge our feelings and know that they are natural. Guess what? I know this is a scary word, but if you're experiencing this, you're normal. Congratulations. So we have to allow ourselves to feel the emotion instead of ignoring it. And sometimes we just have to take a little bit of time to process it, because sometimes we end up prolonging it and it can turn into something like more of a depressive state if we just ignore it and stuff it and keep going. That works for some people, but for most people it doesn't. Sooner or later there's some kind of an explosion or a crash. And a lot of times when we're in that stressful moment, we harness that, we stuff it, we use it as fuel, and that's great. But sooner or later, we still have to deal with it. So it's important to recognize those emotions, know that they're normal, accept them, and allow ourselves to feel them instead of ignoring them and stuffing them. And give ourselves time to process before immediately moving to the next big thing. And again, like I said, sometimes storms don't give us that option right away. In this case, we had a couple that were back to back. People were still doing massive cleanup and just beginning to assess things before the next one came through. So we don't always get that choice right away, but when we do have that moment, we need to make sure we take it, and that's okay. Taking 5 minutes to breathe is not going to get the insurance adjuster there any faster or slower. So recognizing and acknowledging the feelings, that's important in any kind of state. And then it's important to start planning for recovery, and maybe even plan for a little bit of recovery during or before if we can. Marathoners, for example, because this is our other big analogy, they plan out their recovery time after a race. This is, you're supposed to drop your miles way down and just do very slow, minimal recovery runs for a couple of weeks and give your body time to recover. But we also need to make sure that we have time to mentally recover. So plan for recovery by scheduling some downtime, allowing yourself to rest and reflect, and doing things for self-care. Self-care is a big theme in wellness, isn't it? We talk about it a lot. Self-care means retreating into a corner and taking some time to breathe or meditate or pray or reflect. Maybe journal a little bit. Maybe it just means shutting the world out, putting your phone down, turning off the news, and reading a book for a little bit that allows you to kind of escape. Self-care might look like a bubble bath as soon as you have water and power, where you can just shut the door and pour yourself a glass of wine, beer, lemonade, whatever your drink is, and sit and take a bath. Maybe it's a long hot shower after weeks of no power, where, there's jokes about the different types of showers women take. They're either the short ones, the utilitarian ones where we got to go, we do the things and get out. And then there's those life contemplation showers that look, that you're in there till the hot water runs out and the water's scalding, and there's all kinds of jokes and memes about skeletons in the shower because the skin's burned off in the whole 9 yards. I don't recommend that, but you guys know what I'm talking about. So plan for recovery, schedule that downtime, schedule that breather, plan some self-care, whatever that looks like. Even if it's just for 5 minutes, it can make all of the difference. And then set new, smaller goals. So if we're talking about hurricane recovery, a lot of times those goals are going to be wrapped around your home or community improvements. For some of us that weren't as affected, those goals include getting out there and helping others, finding ways to assist. And for those in the midst of it, that goal might be as simple as just getting the water and mud cleaned out of your house. If I can do that in the next 2 days, I'll be happy. Because if we look at the whole picture and everything that's left, it can be extremely overwhelming, and it can put us in that fight, flight, or freeze response where we don't know where to start, so we don't. So little tiny goals, no matter what the big event was that you are experiencing, this post-event depression or fatigue, little tiny smaller goals are easier, they're easier to manage, and they're less overwhelming. So if you don't know where to start in the whole house, you start with a corner. I talked about this a little bit in my recovery video after Helene. Small fitness goals, okay? Like I said, I'm recovered from this half marathon, from this 10K, whatever the length of the race was. So my goal now is going to get back to 2 to 3 short, easy runs a week. Or at that point, you could go ahead and maybe sign up for a race that's a 5K, that's a month or 2 months out, so that you have time to recover and do something shorter that doesn't take as much out of your body. If it's a big work goal, and it's done, then you don't always get a lot of downtime. Where I worked, sometimes we had 2 or 3 events that were within a couple months of each other. But take time to kind of, if you can, put the event that just passed away, do your evaluation of it, your assessment, whatever, before you move on to the next. Sometimes that can be difficult because it can be hard to find that time to finish one thing before you move on to the next thing. And in my case, sometimes that meant taking a couple extra hours at work to put that particular item to bed so that I could move forward and focus on the next thing. Because it was less stressful for me later, even if it was a little extra time now. So set new, smaller goals, set small fitness goals, small goals for home or community improvements, whatever that looks like for you. You don't have to have it all done, all fixed, all wrapped up right away. It's not required. Believe it or not, not everything has to be done 5 minutes ago once the sky's clear or the proverbial sky's clear at work or whatever. So those are just a few tips. Another one is to talk about it. And I, again, spoke about this in the post-Helene video. Sometimes just talking with your peers or being surrounded by peers, and by peers, I mean people experiencing the same thing, people that have gone through the same or something similar. I saw some really interesting conversation in my local area where people were sharing tips about different things that they knew somebody that tried to help keep the water from doing as much damage, like some type of PVC-based wall, wainscoting, whatever. And somebody suggested that they form a group to get together and share this information and work together on ways that they can improve their chances of less damage going forward. And I think that's a fabulous idea. And the reason I think that's a fabulous idea is for the same reason I do Wellness Wednesday. People can share what they've learned. People can share their losses and they can help each other. Everybody's got a different perspective. So getting your peers together helps to assuage those feelings and also to present new ideas that other people might not have thought of. So I think that's fabulous. So talking about it, forming little support groups or whatever so that you are, or finding support groups that are already there so that you are surrounded by peers, is a fabulous way to be able to get your feelings and emotions out in a positive and productive manner, especially if you're sharing ways to recover, whatever that looks like, whether it's emotional, physical, whatever. And that's why peer support groups work. One of the things that NAMI does is peer support groups for adults living with mental health conditions and for family members taking care of adults who live with mental health conditions. So even in a situation like post-hurricane, peer support groups can work. If you've got a group of people that are like, I just need somebody to talk to, can we all just get together for coffee and do a little venting and trade some ideas for how to do better next time? Because more knowledge and more preparation usually means a better outcome, right? So, and again, there's only so much of it we can control, but when we focus on what we can control, everything else seems a little bit less scary. So talk about it. Talk about your feelings. A trusted friend, somebody, a peer that's going through the same thing, your neighbor, whatever that looks like. It's very, very therapeutic as long as you don't focus and dwell, unpack, and live there. Use it as an opportunity to release and to learn new things and to move forward. Mindfulness practices are great, especially if you only have limited amounts of time to find that self-care or that rest. Breath work, yoga, meditation, prayer, gratitude for just right now. You may be looking at a house that's turned topsy-turvy, but if you're alive and you were able to get out, maybe with that special pet or a special picture or something like that, be grateful for that in the moment before you start worrying about what's next. And I know that's really hard sometimes, but there is really, truly something to be found in every single day to be grateful for. And if you've just weathered a big storm and your house is a shambles, the fact that you're alive is absolutely something to be grateful for. The fact that you can stand there and look at it right now and wonder what to do is something to be grateful for. If you've had a major work crisis or a major family crisis, sometimes just being thankful that it's over and now you can kind of breathe and assess and figure out how you're feeling and move forward. Sometimes that is just one thing to be grateful for, that you've gotten through it, especially if there were no major mistakes. I had a fishing tournament that I put together that was particularly stressful one year because our scale wasn't working. And that's a scary thing to find out on the first day of weigh-in. But I took a minute to feel my feelings. And then I started thinking, and I prayed, and then I started thinking of people to reach out to. And we had the situation addressed in less than an hour and a half to 2 hours. And nobody on the outside ever knew the difference. So that's when you can take the time and be like, okay, we got through it. There was nothing You know what I mean? There was nothing major. Sometimes that's what a wedding can look like, or a work event, or whatever. So mindfulness practices help for that. And that's what I did that day. I went inside. I bawled like a baby because I was freaking out. I said a prayer. I did some breathing. And then once I dried up a little bit, my brain started moving forward for a solution instead of being stuck where I was. So mindfulness practices really work for that. Writing down whatever's setting you off, finding gratitude, any of that. So how do we combat this long term? Well, maintaining, and this again, here's where we start sounding repetitive, maintaining healthy habits as long as possible and as much as possible before, during, after, and between. In this case, I say between because of the two storms. Maintaining those healthy habits as much as possible will help you with resilience. And by healthy habits, I mean eating the best that you can, making that time for self-care, making that time to educate yourself and strengthen yourself, and to find gratitude. Those things can all help build resilience, so that when these things come up, you're better prepared to handle it. Pace yourself. Give yourself time to breathe. Don't rush to fill the void, especially in the case of a loss of a loved one or loss of a home. That is a grieving situation. We grieve a lot of things. We don't just grieve someone's passing. We grieve broken relationships. We grieve loss of contact with a friend. We grieve the loss of things we felt were important to us, like a home or specific items in the home, or maybe a piece of furniture that meant a lot to us, that had sentimental value, that got destroyed. Those are all things that cause us as humans to grieve. So it's really important to not make major life-altering decisions. Deciding tomorrow, the day after a storm, that you're moving out of Florida might be a stress response. And after time, if you give yourself time to think about it and go through the cleanup process, you may realize that that's not maybe the best option. Maybe it is. But in the case of losing a loved one, the experts recommend that you go 1 year without making any major life-altering decisions. And I think that's really important in the case of any major stressor, because you want to make sure that you're not doing it as a reaction to the event. I've talked about this briefly before, but I had a really scary event when my daughter was younger. I had somebody that was hanging outside of windows in my apartment complex. He wasn't peeping, but he was talking. And I won't get into the details of what we speculated he was doing outside of those windows, but he had kind of a running monologue for himself. And it was really, really scary. And for me, it was extremely scary to think I was being targeted specifically until I found out it was going on with everyone in the apartment complex. But I had a family member who was, at the time I didn't have any firearms, and he was hell-bent that I needed one immediately. And trying to find ways, well, my daughter had never really been exposed to them, and I didn't know how to use one. So I didn't want to make, to me, that was a major decision. And yes, this is a little bit smaller in comparison to some of the things we're talking about, but it's still a good example. I didn't want to make a major decision that was going to change the way I operated in the home, the way I had to keep things or from my daughter, based out of fear. I wanted to have time to process it. I wanted to choose my own choice of self-defense. I wanted to be adept in how to use it to protect myself so that I didn't get caught off guard or without the confidence I needed to execute whatever I needed to execute, whether it was pepper spray, a firearm, whatever. So that's just a small example of not making major life routine, etc., altering decisions in a knee-jerk response to these major events. So I can certainly see why on a larger level, making major decisions after a loved one passes could be a bad idea, because it may if it's not carefully thought out and it's a knee-jerk response, it may actually cause more problems later. So keep that in mind. Celebrate the wins. Celebrate your wins, because sometimes failure to celebrate and experience that gratitude is what starts those post-event blues. And then if you continue down that path, those post-event blues, which should be temporary, could turn into something more serious that requires a little bit more treatment with a therapist or medication or whatever. Build related support networks. We kind of already covered this. If you have those peer groups that you can rely on to talk about the stress, you don't want to be indifferent the next time a storm, literally or metaphorically, arrives and not be prepared because you just can't even face it because you're dragging your feet. So find those support networks, make those plans, learn from each other to make the way you can respond to the next storm of life better. And then if there were errors, if you did something that you realized, if you're Monday morning quarterbacking, and you realize you could have done this better, if you would have put, you probably would have been okay if you'd have maybe put some Visqueen behind those sandbags, or maybe you didn't think that you were going to get water, so you didn't get sandbags. Maybe next time you're like, okay, the next time I'm going to do it. Those are the things, the PVC wainscoting for those that are experiencing the storm or whatever that is called. Maybe a work event where you realize as you go backwards, and well, if I would have planned this better, then it would have gone better type thing. Once you're past it and you can kind of arm yourself for the future by reviewing and looking at the things that you maybe could have done better, then you're better prepared to learn from it and empower yourself for the next time, because there's always a storm in life. Whether, like I said, whether it's figurative or literal, there's always a storm. And if there's not, there's probably one coming. So the better we can prepare ourselves mentally and physically, but most importantly, mentally and emotionally, the better we can weather those. So that's really what I have. A lot of it is stuff you probably already know, but sometimes we need to be reminded. There's lots of stuff I know and it goes out the window when I'm under stress, when I'm under extreme stress. So, I'm no different than anybody else. And that's where a lot of this information comes from, is when I come up with a Wellness Wednesday topic, unless it's something somebody else has asked me to do, it's based on an experience or based on conversations I'm having or based on a theme or a feeling that I know is out there being talked about. So again, know that hurricane fatigue is a real thing, but it's not exclusive to hurricanes. That kind of fatigue can follow a lot of different things, a lot of different major events. So here's a few things to remember before I close out. It's normal. Again, congratulations if you're feeling that post-hurricane fatigue or post-event fatigue. It's normal. Congratulations, you are normal. And you've probably already experienced it before, but didn't realize it or didn't know there was actually a name for it. It's temporary. And it can stay temporary if you use the tools that you have to address it quickly. It's the ignoring and the stuffing and the trying to step around it that often leads to something less temporary that requires a little bit more attention. Baby steps, y'all. One small goal this week that will help. That's what I would encourage you to do. Whatever you're experiencing right now, set one small goal this week that will help. Rest. That goal could be to rest. That goal could be a new project. That goal could be 10 minutes of self-care every day. Baby steps. That's how we get there. There's a saying, I think it's, if you can't run, walk. If you can't walk, crawl. However it is, just keep moving forward. So baby steps are okay. Tiptoe if you must, but take the step. And then just remember, finally, there are always storms in life, and they all will have some kind of aftermath. Some will be good, some will be bad, some will be downright ugly, and some will be downright spectacular. But what we do with it is up to us. So I hope you found that helpful. I hope you found some morsel of this that can help you through whatever you're experiencing right now, whether it's storm related or whether it's survivor guilt because you didn't experience any damage, but you know many, many people who did, or because you've just gotten done or you're in the throes of planning a wedding, or dealing with a big project at home or at work. I hope you found this helpful. And if you did, I encourage you to share. Message me if you have questions or comments, or drop a comment or a question below, because this video will sit here even after I'm done for you to review, and I will always respond to questions and comments as soon as Facebook shows me that they're there. So I hope you have a fabulous day. And I'm looking forward to this cool weather and to the opportunity to move forward beyond these storms and focus on better things and gratitude. I'm so thankful for all of you. And just let me know if you have any comments or questions. And again, if you found this helpful, please share. I will see you next Wednesday. And in the meantime, be well. Bye.